The alarm on my phone went off at 4:47 a.m., 13 minutes early. Because the phone had learned, the way machines learn things, that I was already awake. I'd been sitting on the edge of the sofa lacing my work boots in the dark for the past 22 minutes, just sitting there. The apartment was small enough that the street lamp outside pushed this thin orange rectangle through the blinds and laid it across the carpet like a dropped towel. I worked by that light. I'd been doing it long enough that my hands didn't need more. The sofa was my bed. It had been my bed for 16 months. Ever since I moved the twin mattress into Zara's room. My daughter was 8 now, but she was born premature, 6 weeks early. And those first months, those were something else. Lungs that needed watching, constant monitoring. I learned to sleep with one ear open, to wake at the smallest sound, to move quietly so I wouldn't disturb her sleep while staying close enough to hear her breathing. For a long time, Zara was afraid of the dark. Even now, at 8, she sometimes woke confused and called out, and I was there, within seconds, because the sofa was close enough to her door that I could hear her clearly. I told myself I'd move the mattress back to the living room when she got older, when she felt more secure in the world, but 8 had come and gone. And the sofa remained my bed. The permanent valley in the left cushion was shaped exactly like me, a geography of my body, worn into fabric over 500 nights. I stood now, rolling my shoulders in slow circles, feeling the familiar ache that came from sleeping on a sofa that was never designed for a grown man's frame. My spine protested. My shoulders were tight, but this was the cost of being close to her. And I'd decided long ago that the cost was worth paying. I moved quietly to the kitchen. The apartment was a second-floor walk-up in Bridgeport, 3 blocks from the highway, in a neighborhood that real estate agents would never describe as up-and-coming. Because everyone understood that it was permanently coming and never arriving. In summer, it smelled like cut grass and exhaust. In winter, and it was deeply, unforgivingly winter now, the second week of January, it smelled like nothing. Because I kept the windows sealed with weather stripping I'd bought at a hardware store and applied myself one Saturday afternoon while Zara drew pictures at the kitchen table and narrated what she was drawing in a voice that expected me to respond every 30 seconds. I'd responded every 30 seconds. I'd also done a precise job on the weather stripping. Both things were true about me, and I was aware of both. That I was thorough about practical tasks, and that I was present with my daughter. And I understood that these two qualities had become a burden sometimes, and sometimes they were the only thing that kept the structure of my life upright. I made coffee in a French press my sister Janet had given me when my wife Tanya left. Janet had meant well. Selecting something that seemed sophisticated, something that would say you're going to get through this, you're going to rebuild, you're going to have moments of grace. I used it every morning now, had used it every morning for 18 months, had come to depend on the ritual, heating water, steeping grounds, pressing the plunger down with slow, controlled pressure. It was a meditation. It was also a reminder that Tanya was gone, which Janet had understood, and which was why the gift had been so perfectly calibrated to wound and comfort simultaneously. I didn't think about Tanya much anymore. She was in Portland now, remarried, doing something in sustainable architecture that paid well and fulfilled her in ways our marriage apparently had not. The fact that I knew this was because Zara told me things that Tanya had told Zara, and I listened carefully and said the right things, and meant them. It was possible, after sufficient time and distance, to wish someone a good life without wanting to share it. Possible. And after sufficient time, not even painful, just a fact, like weather. Something that happened, and that you adjusted to. I drank standing at the counter watching the snow. It had started sometime around midnight, and hadn't stopped. The street below was unmarked, untouched. No tire tracks, no footprints, no sign of the city that surrounded the building. Just a smooth white surface that the orange street lamp turned the color of old paper. I estimated 4 inches already, maybe 5, which would make the salvage yard slower to move through and harder to see, which meant I'd have to be careful, which meant the morning would take longer than it should. I was okay with that. Long mornings were something I understood intimately. The salvage yard paid me $11.50 an hour for part-time work, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. That gave me $460 before taxes. With my electrician work, when I could get it, I managed to bring in another $300 to $400 a week. That put me just over the line of survival. Not comfort, not security, but survival. I'd learned to distinguish between those things. Most people assumed poverty meant having nothing. But I'd learned that poverty meant having almost enough, which was somehow worse, because it meant constant calculation. Could I afford to get the truck's oil changed? How many weeks could the furnace hold without repair? If Zara needed new shoes, what else wouldn't happen? I poured the rest of the coffee into a thermos, clipped it to the strap of my work bag, and walked down the hallway to Zara's room. The hallway was narrow and dim, even in daylight, even in summer. I pushed her door open just 2 inches, not wanting to let out the warmth that the space heater in her room had generated overnight. She was asleep on her side, one arm hanging off the mattress, fingers almost touching the floor, as if she'd fallen asleep mid-reach towards something just beyond her grasp. Her hair was splayed across the pillow in every direction, and in the darkness of the room, lit only by the thin light from the hallway, she looked like someone who had fallen from a considerable height and landed without harm. I stood there for a moment, watching her breathe. This was my daily meditation, this moment of witnessing. Her breathing was regular, steady, untroubled by the small anxieties that sometimes woke her in the night. She had nightmares sometimes, bad dreams about being lost or left behind or forgotten, and she would call out for me, and I would come and sit on the edge of her mattress and tell her that she was safe, that I was right there, that I would never leave her. Sometimes she would drift back to sleep immediately. Sometimes she would keep me there for hours, both of us awake in the dark, waiting for morning. Okay, I said it to myself, or to her, or to no one in particular. It was a word I'd begun using to mean acceptance, commitment, readiness. It meant I know what this day requires. It meant I will do what needs to be done. It meant I'm still here, still showing up. I pulled the door back to 2 inches. I left a note on the kitchen table in large print, pressing hard with the pen so the letters were deep and clear. Back by noon, cereal in the pantry. Don't open the door for anyone. The note was as much for me as it was for her. A reminder of the agreement we had with each other, the boundaries we'd established to keep each other safe. I let myself out into the cold. Chapter 2. The Yard in Snow. The walk to my truck was 15 steps. The truck was parked on the street, and it was so cold that the door stuck slightly when I pulled. The engine took a long moment to turn over. The battery was wearing out. I'd have to replace it soon, which meant money I didn't have. But eventually it caught, and the dashboard lights came to life. I sat for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel, letting the engine warm, watching my breath fog in the cab. The salvage yard was 20 minutes by truck in good weather. In snow, it took longer. I drove a 2004 Ford F-150 with 190,000 miles on it and a heater that worked on the driver's side only. I'd learned to dress for the passenger side, extra layer on my right shoulder and arm, because the cold that seeped through the window and the crack in the passenger door was constant. I wore insulated coveralls over my jeans, and a canvas work jacket over that. And I still felt the cold in my wrists and across my shoulders. I kept both hands on the wheel, not just for safety, but because the cold made my fingers want to clench, and I had to consciously relax them every few minutes. The drive gave me time to think. This was the benefit of a commute. 35 minutes alone with my thoughts, allowed to be fully myself without performance. At work, I was the guy who was quiet and reliable and a little strange because I kept to myself. At home, I was dad, present and engaged and emotionally available in the way that 8-year-olds required. But in the truck, I could be Marcus, which meant thinking about things I didn't have time to think about otherwise. I thought about money. I thought about the tire on my truck that had a slow leak. I thought about whether Zara would need glasses soon because she'd mentioned that the board at school looked blurry. I thought about whether I'd made the right choice leaving my engineering career in Pittsburgh, whether that had been noble sacrifice or cowardly escape. I also thought about my wife. Not the recent wife, the one in Portland doing sustainable architecture, my first wife, the one who died. Claire had been struck by a drunk driver on I-376 in March 2018, when Zara was 14 months old, when I was working late on a bridge rehabilitation project, when I wasn't there to say goodbye. I'd gotten the phone call in a parking garage. I sat in my truck for 2 hours without being able to drive, without being able to do anything except think about how final death was, how there was no take-back, no second chance, no way to reverse the timeline. After that, Pittsburgh had made no sense as a place to be. The city felt like a museum of my former life, a place where people had expected me to be something I could no longer be. I'd come to Pennsylvania taking salvage yard work as a way to earn money while keeping my life simple and my hours flexible, so I could be Zara's primary caregiver. That had worked for a while. But then I'd met Tanya, and Tanya had been kind and present and had tried very hard to love both him and his daughter. And for a while it had seemed like the structure of a life might be possible again. But Tanya had eventually realized that she couldn't be second to a child who had already lost so much. That loving someone who'd been broken by loss meant accepting that the broken parts were permanent. So she'd left, which was fair, which was honest, which had still hurt. Now I was in Bridgeport, doing the same salvage yard work, raising Zara alone, doing electrical jobs when I could find them, trying to make a life that was stable enough that my daughter could believe the world was a place where people stayed. I turned into the salvage yard at 5:40 a.m. The yard was run by a man named Gerald Briggs, 63 years old, had operated the business for 30 years, and possessed the particular combination of reliability and surliness that I found easy to work with. Gerald didn't ask questions about why I'd taken a part-time salvage job when I'd spent 12 years as a licensed electrician. I didn't ask questions about Gerald's accounting practices, which seemed loose at best, and possibly criminal at worst. We got along fine, which in my experience meant that both of us were willing to do the work. And neither of us needed the work to be about anything other than work. I had a key to the side gate. I let myself in at 5:40 a.m. The yard was still dark except for the security lights that created strange shadows between the rows of junked cars. I signed the log in the shed, M. Hayes, 5:40 a.m. lot south, and pulled a cart from the rack. The cart was heavy, and the wheels squeaked slightly, a sound that echoed in the still dark yard. I started my sweep of the south lot. The south lot was where the recent arrivals went. Cars towed in within the last 2 weeks waiting to be processed, stripped, and crushed. Most were ordinary. Domestics with blown transmissions, water-damaged SUVs from a November flood outside Calumet City that had destroyed 40 square miles of vehicles and lives. A cluster of older sedans that a dealership had unloaded when the market shifted. I moved through them with a flashlight and a clipboard, noting VINs and visible damage, doing the initial assessment that Gerald needed before anything could be logged into the system. The snow made it slower than usual. It also made it quieter, which was something I appreciated. The city, even Chicago, even at 6 in the morning, seemed to have retreated behind the snowfall, and the only sounds were the scrape of my boots, and the soft displacement of snow as I moved between cars, and the distant moan of a highway that never actually went silent. The I-95 running parallel to this place, 3 miles away, with traffic that didn't stop even in January, even in darkness. I moved methodically through the rows. My mind was already calculating tomorrow's schedule, whether Zara would need anything for school this week, whether the electric heater in her room was using too much power and would cause a spike in the bill. These thoughts were the background noise of my existence, the constant low-level anxiety that came with being responsible for another human's survival. I heard it at 6:14 a.m. I would know the time exactly later, because the detective would ask me repeatedly, and I'd had reason to check my watch at exactly that moment, having just finished logging a Ford Explorer, and glanced down to note the time. 6:14, which meant I'd been working for 34 minutes, which meant I had 5 hours and 46 minutes before I needed to leave to pick up Zara from school. Thud. A pause. 2 seconds, maybe 3. Thud. I stopped moving. The sound was distinct and impossible. It was coming from my left, the far end of the row where the new arrivals were parked tightest. I stood still for 1 full second, just listening, because I was a practical man and I had a practical man's instinct for not imagining things. The sound was real. The sound was inside a car. I moved toward it without deciding to move, my body responding to something my conscious mind hadn't fully processed yet. Flashlight up. The car was a BMW 7 Series, black. Less than 2 years old by the plates. It had no visible damage, no broken windows, no dents, no sign of a collision or the kind of mechanical failure that sent cars to a place like this. The snow on its hood was undisturbed. It had been here since before the storm, which put it at sometime yesterday afternoon. That was wrong. Gerald processed arrivals personally, and Gerald would never have logged a car in this condition without calling me to look at it first. That was the arrangement. Something hadn't followed the arrangement. Thud, coming from the trunk. I stood still for 1 full second. Every rational calculation said to step back, to call Gerald, to get someone else involved. But I was also a man who'd learned that hesitation could be the difference between saving and losing. And I'd spent 8 years of my life learning how to read situations quickly and make decisions that stuck. I moved to the trunk, found the emergency release seam by feel, and pulled. The trunk opened with a soft hydraulic sound. I aimed my flashlight into the darkness. The woman inside was on her side. Wrists zip-tied behind her back, ankles bound with the same. She was wearing the remains of what had been an expensive charcoal blazer. One sleeve torn almost completely off. There was dried blood at her temple, not fresh, and a cut above her left eye that had scabbed over. Her coat, a long wool overcoat that probably cost more than my truck, had been thrown over her like a blanket rather than worn properly. She was shivering, or had been shivering. Her body curled in on itself in the way that living things curl when they're cold and afraid. What I noticed most was her eyes. They were open. They had been open before I raised the flashlight. She had heard me coming, and she was watching me with an expression that was not fear. Exactly, or not only fear, it was something closer to calculation. She was doing math, making rapid assessments, deciding what she was dealing with. Her eyes were tracking my movements, reading my face, my posture, my reaction. How many people are in this yard? Her voice was controlled, hoarse but controlled, the voice of someone trying very hard to compensate for what was happening in the rest of her body, right now, at this moment, in this facility. How many people are here? Just me. What time is it? 6:15. She processed this information the way someone processes information that might be the difference between living and dying. How far are we from the nearest road? Quarter mile, maybe. There's a gate. It's locked. She nodded once, as though confirming something she'd already calculated. Cut the ties, then we need to talk fast. You're going to help me, and we're going to do this quickly, and you're not going to ask questions. Do you understand? He was already pulling the utility knife from his coverall pocket. The knife had a blade maybe 3 inches long, worn to a perfect edge. He'd used it 1,000 times, cutting drywall, trimming insulation, 100 small tasks that required precision and control. The zip ties were tight, but they gave way quickly when he cut through them. The first one parted with a slight resistance and then released. The second took longer, because it was wrapped more tightly around her wrists, and because her wrists were swollen and turning blue from lack of circulation. "Don't touch them," she said it as the second tie parted. "They'll hurt more if you touch them." He stepped back, and she pushed herself up slowly, working her way out of the trunk like someone whose body wasn't quite responding correctly. Her arms came forward, and she gasped when the blood started circulating back into her hands. She was breathing in short, controlled breaths, and she was definitely calculating. He could see it in the set of her jaw, in the way her eyes were scanning the yard for exits and threats and possibilities. Her name was Dr. Natasha Crawford. He didn't know that yet as he helped her out of the trunk, steadying her arm when her legs didn't want to hold her weight. He knew she was injured and cold. She'd been in there for a minimum of 6 hours in January, and the interior temperature of that trunk would have dropped to near freezing. Her lips had a faint blue tint at the corners. Her hands, when she steadied herself against the car, were shaking badly enough that the fine motor movements were difficult. "Can you walk?" "I'll walk." She tested her weight on both legs, winced slightly, didn't fall. "Which direction?" "North. But first, are you hurt? Do you need an ambulance? I need to know what I'm walking into before I decide what I need." She looked back at the BMW with an expression that suggested she was memorizing details, making calculations about what the car's presence meant, who had put her there, how much time had passed, where she was in relation to everything else. She was already planning. Chapter 3. The Emergency Release. Hook Moment. They made it to the main gate. He unlocked it with his key, and when the gate swung open, she stopped for just a moment to look back at the BMW, at the space where she'd been trapped, at the landscape that had contained her terror. He understood that she was taking in details, committing the scene to memory, doing the work of a survivor who understood that details might matter later. "I found you," he said it. "I'm going to call the police." "Wait." She held up a hand. The gesture was sharp, authoritative, a woman accustomed to being obeyed. "Not yet. I need to make a call first. You can make a call with the police on the way." "No, I can't, because if the police arrive first, narrative control passes out of my hands. Right now, for the next few minutes, I still have options." He understood then that this was not a random kidnapping, not a crime of opportunity. This was calculated. She was calculated. Even standing in the snow in a ruined blazer with blood on her face, she was thinking 3 moves ahead, aware of how the story would be told, aware that the way something was told mattered as much as what actually happened. "What are you going to do?" "Call my lawyer. Tell him I'm alive and I'm safe. Tell him I was taken by people operating on behalf of someone specific, and that I will provide details. But first I need to reach a secure location and have documentation in place. I don't understand any of that." He said it. But he did. Actually, he understood that she was protecting herself, that she understood the danger she was in, and that she was not going to be protected by accident or by trusting the normal systems. She was going to protect herself through strategy and preparation and control. She used his phone. The lawyer's name was James Hargrove. He answered on the first ring, which suggested he'd been awake, which suggested he'd already known something was wrong. The conversation took 90 seconds. Hargrove did the listening. She did the talking. She told him about the trunk, about the time frame, about the fact that she was unharmed, but that she did not want police involvement until legal strategy was in place. She told him about the BMW with the VIN she recited from memory, about the salvage yard location, about the man named Marcus who had found her and cut her free. When she hung up, he said it. "Your lawyer told you not to call the police. My lawyer told me to get to safety, secure documentation, and then contact authorities in a way that protects my position. Those are 3 different things happening in sequence. My truck isn't secure." He said it. "No," she agreed. "But it's leaving, and I need to leave with it." He drove. She sat in the passenger seat with her coat wrapped around her and gave directions to Manhattan, to a building on the 38th floor, to an office that didn't turn on its lights until she arrived, because security guards had been standing ready with that knowledge, even though he hadn't told them, which meant that Hargrove had already been planning for this possibility. The drive took 90 minutes. She sat mostly silent, watching the landscape pass, occasionally closing her eyes, but never fully relaxing. Her hands remained in her lap, palms up, where she could see them, where she could observe the swelling reducing slightly as blood flow returned to normal. He asked no questions. He simply drove, northward through the state, through landscape that gradually became denser, more populated, more urban. They stopped once for gas. She went to the bathroom while he filled the tank, and he watched her walk with careful steps, as if her legs might not cooperate, as if the act of moving through normal space required significant conscious effort. When she returned, she was carrying a bottle of water, and she drank it without stopping. The way someone drinks when they've been thirsty for hours and hours. By the time they reached the office, it was 8:45 a.m. The building was glass and steel and anonymous. The kind of building where important things happen without anyone outside knowing about it. Security guards in the lobby nodded at her. They recognized her and directed them to a private elevator. Up 38 floors. When the doors opened, there was a conference room waiting, and a medical doctor waiting, and a lawyer waiting, and someone who looked like they worked in crisis management waiting. By 9:30 a.m. she had been photographed, her injuries documented from multiple angles, examined by a doctor who declared no serious physical damage, but who noted extensive bruising and recommended psychological evaluation, and debriefed by Hargrove and two associates. By 10:15 a.m., Hargrove was looking at him with the expression of a man trying to calculate whether someone was credibility or complication. Part 2. The Collision of Two Worlds. Chapter 4. Class Contrast, the Assessment. Who are you? Hargrove asked it, the way a lawyer asks. Sharp. Assessing. Exactly, the person who found her. In the trunk. And you're staying because she asked me to. Hargrove looked at her, she looked at me. It was the first time she'd really looked at me since the truck ride. Without urgency driving the moment, without necessity keeping her focused. She was assessing me. The way she'd assessed the BMW, and the gate, and the road, and everything else. She was calculating whether I was an asset or a liability. Whether my presence would help her or harm her. He stays. She said it. Hargrove accepted this with the grace of a man who recognized that a decision had been made. I'll need his statement. Full account, everything he saw, everything he did, timeline of events. He paused, letting his eyes rest on me. And then we need to talk about whether he becomes public or stays internal. Internal for now, she said. He's not part of the narrative until the narrative is secure. I sat in a waiting area while she was in a conference room with 3 lawyers and a medical examiner, and someone who looked like she was from insurance or risk management. I watched junior associates in $300 shoes pass by with documents and phones, and the particular confidence that came from having never questioned whether you belonged. I calculated my hourly worth against their weekly income, and then I stopped calculating. Because it was a path that ended only in resentment. The waiting area had floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Manhattan. I'd been to New York once before, years ago, when I was still married to Claire. And we'd taken a weekend trip to celebrate an anniversary that now felt like it belonged to a different person's life. I remembered feeling small in the city, insignificant, aware that I was an observer passing through someone else's world. I felt that same way now. But worse, because now I was implicated in something larger than myself, and I didn't fully understand what. Hargrove found me there at noon. I need you to walk me through this. He said it, everything, starting from when you arrived at the yard. I told him every detail, the alarm, the snow, Gerald's absence from the log, the BMW's condition, the sound. My decision to investigate, what I found, what she said, what I did. I didn't offer motivations, I didn't apologize for helping, I didn't perform humility or ask for credit. I just told the truth in order. Precisely. The way an electrician describes a circuit. Cause and effect. Input and output. What happened and what followed. When I finished, Hargrove was quiet for a moment. He made notes, but not many, suggesting he was listening more than recording. She's my client, he said finally, and her safety is my primary concern. But you understand that your involvement creates complexity, I'm aware. You're going to be questioned by police. Your background is going to be examined. Your relationship to her is going to be interpreted as transactional or romantic or exploitative or naive, depending on who's doing the interpreting. Okay, none of that is fair, but it's the cost of being visible in her story. I thought about Zara asleep on her mattress. I thought about the note I'd left, back by noon, cereal in the pantry, don't open the door for anyone. I thought about the emergency babysitter I'd called, my sister Janet, who'd said again, in that tone that wasn't anger, but was close, suggesting that my complications were becoming her burden. I need to go home. I said it, my daughter. I told her I'd be back by noon. It's 12:30, Hargrove said. I can have security drive you back to Bridgeport. But understand, you'll be followed, not by my people, by the people who took her. They're going to want to know who you are, why you helped her, whether you're a loose end they need to manage. Chapter 5. The drive home. Class in motion. The drive home took 90 minutes. The security driver was professional and silent. A woman in her 40s with the demeanor of someone who'd spent her career protecting people from consequences. I watched the landscape move backward, from glass and steel back to industrial, from Manhattan back to the places where people like me actually lived. I thought about the thud from the trunk. I thought about the woman's eyes. I thought about the choice I'd made to cut the zip ties instead of calling 911 from the beginning, whether that had been noble or reckless. I thought about how some choices make sense at the moment and only become questionable in retrospect, and how some people live their entire lives making those questionable choices and somehow end up okay anyway. When I reached the apartment building, Janet's car was still parked outside. The security driver waited until I was inside before driving away, and I understood that she would be watching the building, would know when the next threat approached, would be part of the invisible infrastructure of protection that was now surrounding my life. Zara was sitting at the kitchen table with Janet. drawing. Janet had a master's degree in art history and worked at a museum and sometimes brought museum logic to parenting, which mostly meant trying to get Zara to think about art in theoretical ways. Zara had drawn a picture. The two of us. Stick figures, with her slightly taller than me. Janet had drawn a cross through it and written accurate height differential, which was her version of a joke. Zara had laughed. When I came through the door, they both looked up. "You said noon." Zara said it. No accusation in her voice, just fact. She was good at facts, good at noticing when things didn't align, good at remembering the agreements we'd made with each other. "I know, I'm sorry, something happened." "Something bad?" Zara asked. "Zara. Something complicated. Something that required me to stay in the city longer than I planned." Janet left 20 minutes later with a meaningful look that suggested we would be talking about this. I and Zara ate cereal at the kitchen table. She told me about school, about a girl named Maya who had a guinea pig that she'd named Sergeant Fluffington, about the proper procedure for sharpening a pencil using the wall sharpener, straight down, not angled, or else the tip breaks, about the fact that one of the classroom goldfish had disappeared, and nobody would explain where it had gone, which seemed like a pattern, like maybe the goldfish were trying to escape something. I listened, asking follow-up questions I did not have to manufacture interest in. I had found early on that the work of single fatherhood was less exhausting when I treated Zara's observations as seriously as she intended them, which was to say, as the most important things in the world. When she talked about Sergeant Fluffington, I asked about the guinea pig's personality, what it liked to eat, whether it seemed happy. When she talked about the goldfish, I speculated with her about where it might have gone, whether it had found a better place, whether it was trying to tell the other fish something. That night, after she was asleep, the police came. Chapter 6. The First Interrogation. 2 detectives arrived at 8 p.m., both white men, one older, one younger, with the particular wariness of people who'd spent the day chasing a story that didn't make linear sense. They sat in my living room, which felt smaller with them in it, more fragile, more of a violation. They asked me to recount everything again. I did. They took notes, they asked follow-up questions, designed to catch contradictions, inconsistencies, lies. The older detective said it. "So you're telling me you found a woman in a trunk. You cut her ties, you drove her to Manhattan, and then you went home?" "Yes." "No phone calls to police until your lawyer contacted them?" "I didn't have a lawyer, she had a lawyer. I just did what she asked." The younger detective leaned forward. "And why would you do that? She's a stranger. You're risking legal exposure. You're putting yourself in the middle of something you don't understand, and you're doing it for someone you've never met." "Because she asked." I said it again. "Because I could. Because it seemed like the right thing." The older detective exchanged a look with the younger. It was a look that I had seen before in my life. A look that meant certain assumptions had been made. There are going to be people who question your motives, who wonder if you're involved in this somehow. "I found her in a trunk." I said it, I helped her, that's the entire story. "Is it?" the younger detective said, "because from where we're sitting, it looks like maybe you and Crawford are connected somehow. Maybe you're a plant, maybe this whole thing is insurance fraud or corporate misdirection or something we haven't figured out yet. I work at a salvage yard. I said it, I live in Bridgeport. I have a daughter. I don't know anything about insurance or corporations. I just found someone in a trunk. They left at 9. They told me not to leave town. They told me there would be follow-up questions. They told me this case was going to get complicated. I knew they were right." Chapter 7. The story breaks, media and narrative. The next morning, the story broke. Female CEO kidnapped. Private equity firm implicated. Natasha Crawford's face was everywhere suddenly. Professional headshots, images of her at corporate events, photos from Harvard Business School graduation, images that made her look like someone from a different world, which she was. The narrative spun quickly. Female founder, successful company, rival firm suspected of foul play, kidnapping foiled by mysterious witness. I learned Natasha's full story through news coverage rather than conversation. Dr. Natasha Crawford, 38 years old, CEO of Crawford Capital, a private equity firm specializing in infrastructure investment, 18 months of litigation with rival firm Halcyon Consolidated, owned by Victor Hale, wealthy industrialist, known for aggressive acquisition tactics. Hale had tried to acquire her company through hostile means. She had refused. The kidnapping was presumed to be escalation. Police identified their BMW as stolen, traced to a rental agency with fake credentials. Security footage showed 3 men, 2 of them identified, both with prior connections to Halcyon Consolidated. The third was still unknown. By day 4, Hargrove had filed an emergency injunction preventing Halcyon from moving assets. By day 6, police had executed a search warrant on Halcyon's offices. By day 9, federal agents had become involved. By day 12, I had been questioned 3 times and cleared of suspicion. Natasha called me on day 14. Her voice was different than it had been in the truck. Less urgent, but less controlled. More human, more vulnerable, which seemed to require effort from her, as if vulnerability was a language she'd never been fluent in. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Yes. Are you?" "No, but I'm working on it." A pause, during which I could hear her breathing, could sense her organizing her thoughts. "I wanted to thank you. Hargrove told me you haven't spoken to press, that you've been careful about privacy. Where did you expect me to go? Talk to magazines? Some people would have. Some people would have seen this as opportunity. I'm not some people." She said it. I know. I've been thinking about that, about why someone would help a stranger without expecting anything in return. It doesn't fit any rational model I have. "Maybe your models are incomplete." She laughed. It was genuine, the kind of laugh that comes from surprise, from someone saying something that shifts your understanding slightly. "Yes, maybe they are." The conversation lasted 45 minutes. We didn't talk about the case. We didn't talk about Hale or evidence or legal strategy. We talked about childhood and loss and what it meant to stay when leaving was always an option. She told me about her childhood. Private school, East Coast money, parents who pushed achievement as currency, who had modeled a particular version of power that didn't include vulnerability. I told her about mine. Public school, neighborhood money, parents who pushed survival as currency, who had shown me that power was sometimes just the ability to keep showing up. She asked about Zara, and I described her with the precision of someone who'd memorized every detail. She asked what Zara wanted to be, what she dreamed about, what made her laugh. I told her about Sergeant Fluffington, about the disappearing goldfish, about how Zara thought deeply about things and saw patterns that most people missed. "She sounds incredible," Natasha said. "She is." I agreed. "She's the reason I do anything at all." Another pause. Longer this time. Then, her voice steady but with an edge of something underneath. "I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer, not a kind one." "Okay. If I tell you the full scope of what happened, the people involved, the money, the fact that there are people who would prefer I disappear, if I tell you all of that, are you going to get scared and decide this is too complicated for your life?" I thought about the sofa and the weather stripping and the French press. I thought about Zara's face when she learned that her mother had gotten remarried. I thought about how complicated my life already was, how I'd been managing complications since birth, how the baseline of my existence was already one emergency away from collapse, how adding one more source of complexity was perhaps the least frightening thing I could imagine. "I've already decided it's complicated." I said it. "What you tell me doesn't change that." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Okay." And she told me everything. About Crawford Capital and Hale's acquisition attempts, about the litigation that had turned personal, about how he'd escalated from legal harassment to actual crime, about the amount of money involved, millions, tens of millions, the kind of numbers that meant something different when you were someone who'd spent his life thinking in hundreds. Part 3, Descent into Complication. Chapter 8, Into the Elite World, Observation. The next morning Hargrove called. "Crawford wants you at her office. He said it. We're preparing for something. You'll need to be there." "I arranged coverage at the Salvage yard," Gerald said again, but with a shrug that suggested some men came to live their lives on sofa edges, and some women came to them through trunk discoveries, and the world had room for both stories. He meant it kindly, which made it worse somehow. The drive to Manhattan took 90 minutes. The office was like a military installation. Security protocols, background checks, people moving with urgent precision. Natasha was in the conference room with 3 lawyers and someone from cybersecurity and someone from crisis management. She looked exhausted and energized simultaneously, the way people look when they're running on purpose and coffee and the certainty that something is at stake. She saw me and stood. "Thank you for coming." "I came because you asked." She said it then. "Hargrove is building a case. It's going to take time. It's going to require documentation, witness testimony, careful management of narrative. And throughout all of that, I'm going to need you to corroborate the timeline. You need me to be a witness. I need you to be a witness who keeps his mouth shut until it matters. I need you to not talk to press. I need you to not explain yourself to friends or family. I need you to exist in this moment, this space, and nowhere else until I tell you it's safe to." "What about Zara?" I asked it. "Zara should continue her normal life. School, friends, everything the same. But you should know. Hale's people are probably going to try to identify her. They're probably going to try to use her as leverage." I felt something cold move through me. A fear that was different from other fears. A fear that reached into the part of me that was a father. "No, I know," she said, "which is why we're going to be very careful about how you appear in this case. As far as publicly possible, you're a salvage yard worker who happened to find a car. You're not connected to me. You have no relationship with me. You're a man who did his civic duty and now he's moving on. But I haven't moved on. I know, but you will appear to have." She was looking at me in a way that suggested she understood what she was asking. She understood that she was asking me to disappear from the narrative even as I remained implicated in the reality. She understood that this was a kind of sacrifice. But sacrifice was what was required. Chapter 9. The database breach. Threat becomes real. At 9:15 p.m. on day 34, I logged into the Salvage yard system from my apartment to check on a simple query, confirming the VIN of a car that had arrived earlier that week. While I was in the system, I saw something that shouldn't have been there. A query. Dated that afternoon, someone had searched for black BMW 7 Series, January arrival, recent towing routes, vehicles processed January 14th to January 15th. The specificity of the search was immediate and terrifying. Someone knew about the BMW. Someone was looking for evidence that Natasha had been at the salvage yard. Someone was tracking where she'd ended up. I called her immediately. Don't ask how. I said it, but someone accessed the salvage yard database today. They're looking for your car. Natasha was quiet for a moment. That's escalation. Yes. Where are you right now? The apartment. Zara's asleep. Stay there. Don't leave. And Marcus. Her voice shifted. Make sure your door is locked. Real locked. Not just latched. For the first time since the beginning, I heard fear in her voice. Not panic, but fear. Real fear. I checked the locks on my apartment door. I checked the locks on Zara's window. And I realized that the building was old. And the locks were old. And if someone actually wanted to get inside, there wasn't much preventing them. I sat on the sofa, my bed, my valley. And I listened to the sounds of the building around me. Water pipes creaking. Someone's television from the apartment below. The constant hum of the city that never fully went silent. I thought about what Hargrove had said. Hale's people are probably going to try to use her as leverage. I thought about who those people might be. I thought about what they might be willing to do. Zara woke at 3 a.m. calling for me. I went to her room immediately, sat on the edge of her mattress, told her that she was safe, that I was right there, that I would never leave her. She drifted back to sleep with her hand in mine, her grip loosening as unconsciousness took her. I stayed there for another hour after her grip released, sitting in the dark of her room, listening to her breathe, making calculations about threat and safety, and whether I'd made the right choices. At 6:15 a.m., Zara texted me. She had recently learned to use my old phone that I'd set up for her. We'd established a system where she could text me from her room before getting out of bed, if she was worried, or scared, or just wanted to know he was close. This morning the message came in cipher, a Caesar cipher she'd been practicing that week, using the system consistently, without errors. I decoded it on the third try. I know you check on me. I check on you too. I sat with that for a while, understanding that my daughter, 8 years old, wise beyond her years, was acknowledging that she understood my anxiety, that she understood why I woke to check on her, why I listened to her breathing, why I couldn't fully relax as long as she was asleep. And she was telling me that she did the same thing, that she also checked on me, in her own way, that she was also afraid of losing me. Chapter 10. Surveillance and the weight of it. At day 40, I noticed I was being followed. White sedan, 3 cars back on the route to the salvage yard. When I changed lanes, it changed lanes. When I took a turn, it took a turn. When I reached the salvage yard and parked, it parked across the street and sat there, visible, deliberate. I called Natasha. I think I'm being followed. You are. She said it calmly. Don't be surprised by that. They want to know if you're still in communication with me. Should I go to police? Hargrove already has. He's filed a report. It's documented. Now they have to be visible about it. It makes them reckless. Reckless is useful. I started taking different routes to the salvage yard. I varied my schedule. I made sure Zara's school knew to alert me if anyone unknown tried to pick her up. I began living in a state of low-grade vigilance that felt oddly natural, given my life had been low-grade vigilance for approximately 32 years. This was just a different kind of threat. Gerald asked me about it once. I was in the office at the salvage yard, and Gerald came in with a cup of coffee and closed the door behind him. You're in something. He said it. It wasn't a question. Yes. Something big. Yes, your daughter's safe. Yes. I'm making sure she stays that way. Gerald nodded. He didn't ask for details, and I didn't offer them. You need anything, you tell me. I've been doing this business long enough to know how to keep my mouth shut. The surveillance intensified. By day 47, I noticed a second car. By day 50, there was someone photographing me leaving my apartment. By day 55, my address had been leaked to media, and reporters started calling, asking if I had any comment on my involvement with the kidnapping case. I didn't call them back. On day 51, Natasha called me at midnight. The sound of her voice was different. It carried an intimacy that hadn't been there before. A willingness to be vulnerable across the phone line that suggested she was being something other than strategic. Are you awake? She asked. No. He said it, which was their joke now. The word that meant, I've been waiting for you to call. Good. A pause. He could hear her shifting, changing positions, maybe getting more comfortable. I've been thinking about what you said, about Zara, about how she waits for you every morning, how she's just present. Yes. I've been waiting for things most of my adult life. She said it quietly. But I'm not sure I've ever waited the way you described. Not present waiting, anxious waiting, desperate waiting, but not present waiting. You have to learn it from someone, I said. I learned it from her. That seems backwards. You're the parent. You're supposed to teach her. Not really. Kids teach you things. You think you're teaching them, but you're teaching each other. She teaches me how to be present. I teach her how to be safe. We're both teaching each other how to love each other. They talked until 2 a.m. They didn't talk about the case. They talked about their parents and their childhoods and what it meant to survive things that should have destroyed you. She told him about her father, who'd been a corporate raider in the 80s and 90s, who'd modeled a particular version of ruthlessness that had been useful in some ways and destructive in others. She talked about her mother, who'd supported her father's career at the expense of her own, who'd modeled a particular version of sacrifice that she'd spent her adulthood trying not to replicate. He talked about his parents, who'd worked 2 jobs each, and who'd nevertheless struggled to keep the lights on, who'd modeled resilience and dignity, who'd never complained about their circumstances, but who'd carried the exhaustion in their shoulders. His mother was dead now, cancer, 8 years ago. His father had followed 3 years later. As if he couldn't manage the world without her. Zara had never met them. By the time they hung up, Marcus understood that something had shifted between them. Not romantic, not quite, but intimate in a way that transcended the circumstances that had brought them together. They'd shared trauma. They were now sharing vulnerability. Part 4. The pressure intensifies. Chapter 11. The board meeting. Public assessment. On day 60, Crawford Capital board meeting was scheduled to address company stability. The stock prices had fluctuated wildly since the kidnapping news broke. Investors were nervous. Board members were asking whether Natasha should recuse herself from operations, whether her trauma affected her judgment, whether the company was stable enough to keep her at the helm. She prepared a presentation with Hargrove. Timeline of harassment, evidence of attempted acquisition, pattern of intimidation against other competitors. The presentation was designed to do 2 things simultaneously: establish that the kidnapping was part of larger pattern of corporate aggression, and demonstrate that she was thinking clearly, was strategic, was functioning at high level despite what had happened to her. I attended the meeting. Hargrove had insisted on it, not for her emotional support, but for her strategic position. Having me present would demonstrate that she had a corroborating witness, that the timeline was verifiable through independent perspective. The boardroom was all glass and dark wood and expensive furniture. There were 12 board members, mix of ages and races, but all carrying the confidence that came from wealth and position. They looked at me with curiosity, and some measure of skepticism, as if they were trying to determine my utility or threat level. She presented calmly. She showed phone records, video footage, financial transactions. She showed the pattern. How Hale had tried to acquire her company through normal channels, and then escalated to harassment when normal channels failed. How he'd used his institutional resources to pressure her through legal means, business means, personal means. How the kidnapping was the final escalation. The moment where corporate competition had become actual crime. A board member asked it. "And who is this man?" pointing at me. "The man who found me in a trunk and called for help." She said it. "The man who is corroborating the timeline. The man I trust." Another board member said it. "Does your judgment regarding Mr. Hayes constitute reason to question your judgment in other areas?" "My judgment regarding Mr. Hayes is that he's trustworthy." She said it calmly. "My judgment regarding Halcyon Consolidated is that it's a threat. Both judgments are based on evidence and experience and assessment. The board voted to continue normal operations, authorize legal team to pursue case aggressively, and declined to request her recusal. As the board dispersed, one member pulled Hargrove aside. I overheard the question. "That man in the back, why is he here?" The question echoed larger doubt. Is Marcus credibility or complication? Chapter 12. Strategic distance. On day 67, Hargrove told us that ongoing joint involvement risks contaminating witness testimony. Legal strategy required distance. She must be protected as injured party. I must remain credible as independent observer. We could not appear collaborative in public. So we stopped seeing each other. I asked it. "So you appear to stop?" She said it. Clear distinction. We're still connected, just strategically invisible. For the next 3 weeks, I returned to normal. Work, Zara, school runs, evening routines. The sofa remained my bed. The valley in the left cushion remained shaped like me. But underneath everything, there was communication. Encrypted calls, messages that would delete themselves, updates on case progression, threat level, changes in surveillance. She was navigating legal process, slow, methodical, document by document, building case and building walls, constructing narrative that would hold in court and in public opinion. Sami. I was staying visible while remaining uninvolved. I was the salvage yard worker who'd helped a stranger. I was the background character in someone else's story. I was the man who'd done the right thing and was now moving on. But the reality underneath the appearance was different. Chapter 13. Evidence emerges. By day 84, Hargrove subpoenaed Halcyon's internal communications. Court order forced limited disclosure. Phone records showed Victor Hale called the building superintendent, Patterson, 3 days before kidnapping. Same phone number appeared in records of prior litigation against Crawford Capital. The thread was thin, but continuous. Hargrove was pulling it with precision of someone who liked continuous threads, who understood that small details accumulated into irrefutable narrative. Video footage from parking garage showed 2 men placing tracking device under her vehicle. Device was sophisticated, expensive, professional. This was planned operation, not improvised crime. By day 90, Hargrove filed second emergency motion, criminal complaint naming Halcyon Consolidated as corporate entity implicated in kidnapping and witness intimidation. Complaint included phone trace, vehicle identification from Salvage Yard database, named Victor Hale as orchestrator, though direct evidence remained circumstantial. Victor Hale's communications director released statement expressing bewilderment and promising full cooperation. Professional denial wielded like shield. News outlets picked up story. She became sympathetic figure. Female founder, vindicated by evidence. Trauma survivor fighting back against predatory power structure. Stock market reacted. Halcyon's shares dipped. Crawford Capital stabilized. Chapter 14. The Breaking Point. By day 98, Victor Hale's legal team filed motion to suppress evidence. Database records obtained without proper warrant, they argued. Private system. Private company. Murky legal territory. Judge ordered hearing on admissibility. If evidence suppressed, entire case collapsed to circumstantial phone records and hearsay. Hargrove and Natasha discussed worst-case scenario. Case falls apart. Hale walks. I become liability because my initial actions created legal vulnerability. They want to make you the problem. She said it. If you become problem, everything I claim becomes suspect. I could take a plea deal. I said it. Say I accessed system without authorization. Take the hit. That destroys you and it doesn't save me. I understood that some problems couldn't be solved by sacrifice. Some fights required both people to hold line. Judge ruled. Database access is admissible. I was acting on reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. My job included security. Good faith belief there was imminent threat to person. Evidence stands. Case continues. Victor Hale's strategy shifts from legal suppression to settlement negotiation. Chapter 15. The settlement offer. By day 102, Victor Hale's team makes offer. Settlement. $15 million to Natasha. Non-disclosure agreement, mutual statement that matter is amicably resolved. Settlement would end case immediately, avoid trial, protect Hale from reputational damage, silence her narrative. Hargrove presents it as legitimate option. This is significant money, he said. This is your life back. She considered it for approximately 4 minutes. I watched her calculate. I could see it in the set of her jaw, in the way her fingers moved across the edge of the conference table. No, she said finally. I'm not interested in silence. Hargrove blinked. Crawford, you understand what you're rejecting here? Yes. Money in exchange for allowing him to keep operating this way against other people. He's already facing federal charges. The criminal case might not convict. The civil case might settle. The narrative might get lost. I need to be certain. And the only way to be certain is to take this to trial and win it in public where he can't make it disappear. Hargrove sat back. That's expensive principle. Yes. Marcus, hearing about the decision hours later through encrypted call. You could have taken that money. You could have closed this. I could have. She said. I didn't. Does that bother you? No, it scares me, because now he has nothing to lose by pushing back. She was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about something else too, about how you found me and stayed even though nothing required you to, even though everything suggested you shouldn't. Yes, I think I've been trying to understand why for 98 days now, and I think I'm wrong to try. I think maybe I just need to accept it and move forward. Move forward where? I don't know yet, but with you in it somehow, if you're willing. I was willing when I cut the zip ties. Chapter 16. Escalation. When stakes become personal. By day 110, Victor Hale stops playing legal games. Strategy shifts to discreditation. Private investigators contact Zara's school asking about my background, my involvement with Natasha, whether there's unusual relationship or financial entanglement. School principal contacts me directly. It's standard procedure. They have to report external inquiries about students, but it means Zara is now in sightline. Fear becomes not theoretical, but visceral. Hargrove advises, we need to accelerate trial date. We need to go public with everything before narrative can be controlled. Natasha, hearing that I'm worried about Zara. This is what I mean by complicated. You're inside it because of me. I'm inside it because someone was in a trunk and I helped her. You're inside it because someone put you there. Neither of us caused the other's presence. I was already inside something complicated. I just didn't know what kind until I heard that sound. It's a meta moment. Marcus, recognizing that complexity was already the condition of his life. Single parent, economic struggle, invisible labor, constant vigilance. He just named it differently. Hargrove accelerates case, requests expedited trial date, court grants it, kidnapping case with institutional implications gets priority. Part 5. The deeper calculation. Chapter 17. Trial preparation. Marcus is prepped by Hargrove's team for trial testimony. What you saw, when you saw it, what you heard, what you concluded, what you did. The questions are designed to be clean, to establish timeline clearly, to make his testimony bulletproof. They will try to make you seem unstable, Hargrove said. They will say you were looking for drama. They will say you had incentive to lie. What's my incentive? They'll say money, or access to her, or desire for revenge on system. I want you to be prepared for that narrative. She is deposed by Hale's legal team. Aggressive, insinuating, designed to trigger trauma responses that can be used as evidence of emotional instability. Questions are brutal, about her intimate life, her business decisions, her mental state. Every choice reframed as decision made by unstable woman who overreacted to business competition. After deposition, Marcus watches her emerge. Visible exhaustion, invisible armor, fracture underneath that she's trying very hard to hold together. He wants to do something, say something, but there's nothing to do or say that wouldn't make it worse. I'm sorry, he said. You didn't put me in that trunk. I brought you into public where they can hurt you more. You brought me into truth. She said it. The fact that truth is painful is not your fault. Part 6. The confrontation. Trial and verdict. Chapter 18. Trial begins. Trial starts on day 134. The courtroom is smaller than expected. More intimate. Less dramatic. Jury is 12 people from surrounding county. Mix of ages and races and professions. Judge Brennan is woman. 60s. With expressions suggesting she's seen enough human behavior to not be surprised by anything. Prosecution opens with timeline. 6:14 a.m. Marcus finds her in trunk. 6:30 a.m. They drive to safety. 7 a.m. Hargrove contacted. 8:45 a.m. They reach Manhattan. 9:30 a.m. Documentation begins. It's clean narrative. Cause and effect. What happened and why. Defense opening is different. Defense suggests she is unreliable narrator. Her fear response makes testimony questionable. Marcus Hayes' involvement is convenient. Perhaps this entire situation is corporate misdirection or insurance fraud or something the jury hasn't figured out yet. Marcus is called to testify on day 3. Prosecution walks him through testimony. Questions about what he saw, heard, did. Marcus answers each with precision. No embellishment, no emotion, just facts. Defense cross-examination is brutal. Mr. Hayes, you were working below your education level when you found Miss Crawford, is that correct? You're a licensed electrician working part-time at a salvage yard. Yes. Why are you working below your professional level? I needed work close to my daughter. Your daughter, whose mother left you? Yes. Defense attorney steps closer. So, isn't it true that Miss Crawford is a wealthy woman? That helping her might seem like way to access resources you don't currently have? No. No what? No to all of it. I found someone in a trunk. I helped her, that's the entire story. And that's what you expect this jury to believe. That a working class man found a wealthy woman and his first instinct was to help with no expectation of reward. Hargrove stands. Objection. The counsel is making assumptions not grounded in evidence and attempting to introduce bias. Judge Brennan. Sustained. Jury will disregard. Mr. Hayes, you're excused, but the damage is done. The insinuation is planted. He understands then how trial works. Not about truth, but about narrative. About making jurors believe a story. Chapter 19. Evidence and the breakthrough. She testifies on day 5. She's composed, credible. She describes her fear, her calculation, her decision-making. She explains her business, her refusal of Hale's acquisition offer, escalating harassment. Defense attorney asks it. How well do you know Mr. Hayes? Not well. I knew him through this situation. And he's helped you significantly during this ordeal? Yes. He found me and protected me and testified to truth. Has he accepted payment from you? No. Has he asked for anything? No. He hasn't asked for anything. That seems unusual. I didn't expect it either, she said. But people aren't always motivated by self-interest. Defense attorney smiles. It's not kind. In my experience, they usually are. On day 8, the first evidence expert testifies. She's analyzed database records, phone calls, financial transactions. She traces path from Hale's office to the building superintendent to the 2 identified kidnappers. The thread Hargrove had been pulling is suddenly visible to entire courtroom. Building Superintendent Patterson testifies on day 9. He admits to being paid $8,000 for information. He admits to receiving calls from men claiming to work for security. He identifies one as employee of firm with contract to Halcyon Consolidated. He admits he'd done it for money. You were paid to set up a kidnapping. I was paid to provide information, he said. I didn't know what it would be used for. But you suspected. Yes. And you did it anyway. Yes, I needed money. The testimony is damaging to defense. Jury is seeing that Hale had institutional resources, that he'd used them, that he'd planned this carefully. By day 10, federal agent testifies about phone trace analysis, numbers, dates, duration of calls, mapping of communication between Halcyon officers and known kidnappers. By day 11, forensic accountant testifies about money flow, payments from Halcyon through dummy corporations to kidnappers. Careful obfuscation, but ultimately traceable. The prosecution's case is tight, it's clean, there are no major gaps. Chapter 20, Closing Arguments and Verdict. On day 12, both sides rest. On day 13, closing arguments. Hargrove stands before jury. This is not case about whether Dr. Crawford was kidnapped. She was. You've heard testimony about that. This is case about whether Victor Hale orchestrated that kidnapping as business tactic. Evidence says yes. Phone records say yes. Surveillance footage says yes. Testimony from people who worked with him says yes. There are no gaps in this narrative. There's no reasonable alternative explanation. There's just the truth. Mr. Hale ordered a kidnapping to acquire a company. He didn't acquire it, but Dr. Crawford was traumatized in an attempt. For that, he should be held accountable. Defense attorney stands. There's no direct evidence. There's no smoking gun. There's a phone call and some financial transactions and a building superintendent who admits he was paid to provide information, but who also admits he's not sure what it was for. That's reasonable doubt. That's the space where presumption of innocence lives. Jury is sent to deliberate at 4 p.m. on day 13. They are back at 6:15 p.m. with verdict. Guilty on kidnapping conspiracy. Guilty on witness intimidation. Not guilty on secondary charges. Clean verdict. Clear message. Judge Brennan sentences Victor Hale to 8 years federal prison. Mandatory minimum. No parole eligibility for 6. Restitution order. $8.2 million to Natasha Crawford. Victor Hale shows no emotion. He will appeal. His lawyers have already indicated that. But for now, he's convicted. He's visible. He's held accountable. The courtroom empties slowly. Jurors avoid eye contact with defense. Some make point of looking directly at him, at her, at Hargrove. They have made decision. They have believed. Part 7. The Resolution and Aftermath. Chapter 21. 18 months later. 18 months after verdict, I have restructured my work life. Licensed electrician work is primary now. Salvage yard is secondary option. Money is still tight, but less desperate. I have options. That matters more than anyone who hasn't lived without options can understand. Zara is in 4th grade. She's learning about coding and logic and the way problems can be solved through systematic thinking. She's also learning about trust and safety and what it means when people choose to stay in your life. She's decoding a message that Natasha left on the refrigerator in Caesar's cipher. They're both enthusiasts now. Natasha having discovered the practice through Zara and developed obsession with encryption and hidden language. The message is just a name, Emma. Zara decodes it on the 3rd try and looks at her father with expression of someone who'd cracked code she was already expecting to find. I knew it, she said. 3 more pages. I said, Dad. She said, yeah. I said, the way I said things I meant. She has restructured Crawford Capital. She's removed 2 board members, the ones who'd questioned her judgment. She's implemented security protocols that became industry standard. She's rebuilt what Hale had tried to destroy. She is CEO and survivor, leader and vulnerable woman, all at once. She's also present, in ways that don't require grand gestures, just consistent choice. She calls me, she asks about Zara, she comes to school events, she sits at my kitchen table. The sofa is gone now. We'd bought Zara a proper bed, which meant I could finally sleep on something designed for an adult frame, which felt like luxury. She is part of the domestic architecture of our lives. The case against Victor Hale has become legal precedent. It's cited in 3 subsequent trials involving corporate kidnapping and intimidation. That's perhaps the truest victory. That her trauma translated into structural change. That her suffering had prevented others from suffering in similar ways. It's the hardest form of justice to achieve. It's most enduring once established. Chapter 22. The Observation Deck. Final scene. I stand on the observation deck of Crawford Capitol Building, 38 floors up, looking out at Manhattan skyline. She's beside me. She's showing me the city not as place of danger, but as place where things could be built, changed, fixed. The city sprawls below us. 5 boroughs and millions of people living out their own complications. Zara is in the conference room doing homework at a table that used to feel foreign but now feels like one of many homes she inhabits. She's got her cipher notebook out, her pencils organized by color, her water bottle that I had filled that morning before we got in the car to drive to the city. The morning alarm still sounds at 4:47 a.m., but now I wake because I choose to. The phone doesn't have to learn my patterns because I'm already living them deliberately. I think about the sound that changed everything, the thud from trunk. And I understand that some sounds break things open. Some sounds interrupt your life so completely that you can't go back to what you were before. And some people hear those sounds and walk toward them instead of away. I am both. Broken open by what I've witnessed, by what I've become implicated in, and moving forward with women who calculated in darkness and chose light, who had every reason to disappear and instead chose to stay and fight and rebuild. She takes my hand. Her hand is warm, and the gesture is simple, and it contains everything that can't be said because it's lived instead. It's lived in the small choices to stay, to show up, to be present even when absence would be easier. "Thank you," she said. "For what? For hearing the sound, for walking toward it, for staying." I look at her. After 18 months, I'm still learning to look at her without seeing the trunk first. Still learning to see CEO and trauma survivor and strategic mind and vulnerable person all at once. Still learning that these things can be true simultaneously. "I didn't have a choice," I said finally. "Yes, you did. You always had a choice. Then I'm grateful I made the right one." She squeezes my hand. "Good." Below us, Manhattan continues its argument with itself. The 5 boroughs hold their millions of small dramas and triumphs and heartbreaks. The sun catches the Hudson River and throws light back at the sky. And between us, between Marcus and Natasha, there is something steady. Something that had started as necessity and become intentional. Something that doesn't need to be spoken because it's been acted out daily across 18 months in small choices that accumulated over time into architecture that will hold. Zara comes out to the observation deck and stands between us, looking out at the city. She doesn't say anything. She just stands there. And I put my arm around her, and Natasha puts her hand on Zara's shoulder, and we stand together in silence that is full and complete. Not the silence of people who've run out of things to say, but the silence of people who understand what's been built and are content to witness it. "Can we live in the city?" Zara asked. "No," I said. "We live in Bridgeport. Can we visit the city?" "Whenever we want," Natasha said. "I have an office here. There's always a conference room table for homework and pencil organization and thinking." "Okay," Zara said, which is her word for acceptance and agreement and understanding. It's the same word her father uses. It means, "I know what this moment requires, and I'm ready to move forward." We take the elevator down. The security guards nod at us. The glass doors open to the street, where the real city lives. Not the skyline version visible from observation deck, but the street-level version where people are moving and rushing and living their small, complicated lives. I think about what I was before the thud, before I heard a sound and chose to investigate. Before I met a woman in a trunk who was calculating survival and saw in me something worth calculating toward. I was a salvage yard worker. I was a tired single father. I was a man who'd lost everything once and was managing to build something small again. I still am all of those things, but I'm also a man who heard a sound and answered it, who helped a stranger and stayed through complications that should have scared me away. Who'd learned that some people are worth breaking open for, and that breaking open for the right reasons can lead to new architecture that holds. The car is waiting. The drive back to Bridgeport takes 90 minutes. Zara falls asleep before we've left Manhattan. Natasha sits in the passenger seat and watches the landscape move from urban to industrial to the neighborhood where I live. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what you said, about us, about what comes next. Yes, I don't have the answer yet, but I know I want to keep looking for it. With you." I reach over and take her hand. Outside, the landscape passes, the city falls away. The world returns to the size it was before the trunk, before the thud, before everything changed. But that world is different now because I'm different. And she's different, and the child sleeping in the back seat is different because she's learned that people can stay. When I arrive back at the apartment building, I carry Zara inside. She wakes slightly as I move her, but doesn't fully wake. I settle her in her bed and sit there for a moment, watching her sleep. The daily meditation of witness. I think about how close I came to being someone who'd given up, who'd stopped listening for sounds because listening hurt too much. I think about how arbitrary my choices feel in retrospect, but how inevitable they feel in memory. I go back to the living room. She's sitting on the couch. Not the sofa that used to be my bed, but the new couch we'd gotten together. Comfortable and well made and designed for 2 people to sit side by side. She makes room for me. I sit beside her. Outside, the street lamp pushes its thin orange rectangle through the blinds and lays it across the carpet like a drop towel. "I love you," she said. "It's simple. It's direct. It's the kind of thing that people usually spend time circling around." But she's done with circling. She's done with protection through distance or strategic invisibility. She's stating fact the way facts should be stated. Clearly. With conviction. With the understanding that facts matter. "I know," I said. "I love you too. What happens now? Now we keep going. We figure it out together. We stay." "Okay," she said, borrowing my word, making it hers, understanding that some words are vessels that can hold multiple meanings, multiple intentions, multiple futures simultaneously. Epilogue. 1 year later. The wedding is small, in the courthouse, with Zara as witness, and Hargrove and Janet as the only guests. Afterward, we go to dinner at a restaurant in Bridgeport that I had taken her to on our 3rd real date. The restaurant owner recognizes us both from news coverage, and gives us the best table, and the best food, and the particular grace that comes from someone choosing to see you as you are in present rather than as you were in past. We don't announce it to media. The world moves on. The case becomes case law. Victor Hale appeals. His appeal is denied. He serves his time in minimum security prison in Pennsylvania, where he sometimes passes my salvage yard on work detail. We don't acknowledge each other. I don't need to. Justice done is justice done. I continue working as an electrician and part-time at salvage yard. I have options now. I exercise them carefully. She runs Crawford Capital and is also working on a non-profit focused on helping people who've experienced corporate predation to build legal cases. We split time between Bridgeport apartment and small house we buy upstate, with land and space and a life that's constructed rather than merely survived. Zara grows up knowing both of her homes, knowing both of her parents, her father who raised her alone, and her mother figure who'd stepped into her life through trunk discovery and chose to stay. She learns to code, to think systematically, to understand that world is complex but comprehensible if you pay attention and work carefully. She learns that people can stay. She learns that broken things can be repaired. She learns that sound matters, that answering calls matters, that the small choice to investigate rather than ignore can change everything.